What if I told you a 17-year-old kid once knocked the Beatles off #1, and then spent the rest of his life watching other people become famous using his sound? In 1965, the Beatles were untouchable. They dominated radio, charts, and culture. And then, out of nowhere, a teenager from a small Ohio town replaced them at the top. But here's the part no one talks about. That same kid would go on to shape some of the biggest music of the next 2 decades, without most people ever knowing his name. Fort Recovery, Ohio, mid-1950s, a small town where work was physical and precision mattered. Rick Derringer grew up watching his father work on the railroad, where every piece had to fit perfectly. One mistake could derail everything. That mindset stuck with him. At 8 years old, he saw his uncle play guitar. Something clicked instantly. Not curiosity, obsession. By 9, he had his first electric guitar. Most kids would play for fun. Rick treated it like a job. His first teacher was a local mechanic who showed him a few basic chords. That was enough. Rick played them over and over until his fingers stopped thinking and started reacting. This wasn't natural talent. It was repetition, discipline. By 15, he formed a band with his brother. They called themselves the McCoys. They didn't act like teenagers. They practiced like workers on a shift. Show up, improve, repeat. While other bands were learning simple songs, Rick was studying jazz standards and complex progressions. He built a level of skill most kids his age didn't have. That gave him range. But here's where it gets interesting. That same versatility would later make it harder for him to stand out. In the summer of 1965, everything changed. The McCoys were hired to back a group called the Strangeloves at a show in Dayton, Ohio. Except, the Strangeloves weren't really a band. They were producers from New York, and they had a song they believed could be a hit. The problem was, they didn't have the right image to sell it, so they needed a band. That's where Rick stepped in. 17 years old, Beatles haircut, matching suits, perfect timing. The song was called My Girl Sloopy. It had already been recorded before and gone nowhere. Rick saw potential, but he also saw a problem, the name. So he changed it, Hang On Sloopy, shorter, catchier, more urgent. They recorded it quickly, no overthinking. Then it hit the radio. At first, it moved slowly, then it started climbing, faster every week, until October 1965. Hang On Sloopy reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Right under it, the Beatles with Yesterday. A 17-year-old kid had just taken the top spot from the biggest band in the world.
I believe in yesterday.
But what if I told you that moment of success came with a hidden cost he wouldn't understand until it was too late? At 17, Rick Derringer had already done what most artists spend a lifetime chasing: a #1 hit, national fame, constant radio play. It should have been the beginning of everything. Instead, it quietly locked him into a path he couldn't escape. Because while Hang On Sloopy was exploding across the country, something else was happening behind the scenes. Contracts, the kind no teenager fully understands. Rick and the McCoys had signed deals that looked standard at the time, but in reality, they gave away most of the money their music generated. The song was everywhere: radio, stadiums, even overseas. Rick later said they were cheated just about every way you can be. Think about that. A #1 record, and barely seeing the reward from it. But that wasn't the only problem. The bigger issue was image. Hang On Sloopy became so big, so catchy, that it boxed them in. The industry labeled them a bubblegum act, a lightweight pop band built for quick hits. And for musicians who took their craft seriously, that label stuck. It didn't matter how skilled they were. It didn't matter how hard they worked. Once the industry puts you in a box, it's hard to get out. So they tried to break it. They released more complex music. Albums like Infinite McCoys and Human Ball pushed into deeper rock territory. But audiences didn't follow. The same people who loved Hang On Sloopy didn't want something heavier. And the people who wanted serious rock didn't take them seriously. They were stuck in between. But here's where it gets wild. Instead of chasing the charts, they made a move that would completely change Rick's future. They went underground. By the late 1960s, the McCoys became the house band at Steve Paul's Scene Club in New York. This wasn't mainstream success. This was something different. The scene was where serious musicians played, where legends showed up, where raw talent mattered more than radio hits. Night after night, Rick played with some of the best musicians in the world, and slowly, his reputation started to change. He wasn't just the kid from Hang On Sloopy anymore.
And so I say now, hang on, Sloopy.
He was becoming a musician other musicians respected. That shift mattered, because in 1969, it led to one of the most important partnerships of his career, Johnny Winter, a blues guitar legend known for explosive playing and wild energy. Rick joined him as part of Johnny Winter and, on paper, it looked like a simple band. In reality, it was something deeper. Johnny brought chaos, speed, raw power. Rick brought structure, control, precision. He didn't try to outshine Johnny, he supported him. He played rhythm, but he thought like a producer. He understood how to shape sound, not just create it. And that made him valuable in a way most guitarists weren't. Albums like Johnny Winter and Still Alive and Well showed that balance. They were powerful, but also controlled. But Rick didn't stop there. At the same time, he started working with Johnny's brother, Edgar Winter. And that's where things took another turn. Because what they created next wasn't just a hit. It was something completely different. Working with Edgar Winter opened a completely new door. This wasn't just blues rock anymore. This was experimentation, studio work, production, building songs piece by piece instead of just playing them live. And that's where Rick Derringer quietly became something else. Not just a guitarist, but an architect. The Edgar Winter Group started working on an album called They Only Come Out at Night. One of the tracks was a strange, messy instrumental, long, unstructured, all over the place. It didn't sound like a hit. It sounded like a jam session that went on too long. Most producers would have cut it. Rick didn't. Instead, he broke it apart, literally. This was before digital editing. No computers, no shortcuts. They worked with magnetic tape, physical reels. Rick and Edgar sat there cutting tape by hand, splicing sections together, rearranging pieces like a puzzle. Hours turned into days. But slowly, something started to form. A tight, powerful instrumental. Something that actually worked. That track became Frankenstein, and the name fit perfectly. Because it was built from pieces. Released in 1973, Frankenstein hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. An instrumental track, with no vocals, sitting at the top of the charts. That almost never happens. But wait, this next part matters even more. Because Rick wasn't just producing hits for others. He had his own song, a track that had been floating around for a while, played live, refined over time, raw, loud, straight to the point. Rock and roll, Hoochie Koo. It first appeared in Johnny Winter's live recordings, but Rick knew it was his. So when he stepped into his solo career, he brought it with him. In 1973, he released his debut album, All American Boy. On it was a new version of rock and roll, Hoochie Koo. This one hit. It climbed to number 23 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not #1, but still big. More importantly, it stuck. The song became a staple of 70s rock. The kind of track people didn't just hear, they remembered. Simple riff, strong groove, no overcomplication. It was everything rock was supposed to be at the time. And for a moment, it looked like Rick was finally stepping into the spotlight again. He had credibility, industry respect, a recognizable hit. Everything lined up. But what if I told you, this was actually the peak of his visibility as a solo artist? Because even with a hit song, something still wasn't clicking. The albums didn't explode. The name didn't become massive. And the reason was subtle, but important. Rick was great at everything. Guitar, writing, producing. But the industry didn't know how to sell him. He wasn't extreme enough to stand out. Not flashy enough. Not mysterious enough. Just solid. And in the music business, sometimes being solid isn't enough. Because by the mid-1970s, the rules were starting to change again. By the mid-1970s, rock music was getting louder, bigger, and more extreme. Arena tours, stadium crowds, larger-than-life frontmen, and Rick Derringer was right there, trying to keep up. In 1976, he formed a new band under his own name, Derringer. This wasn't a studio project, this was built for the stage. Loud guitars, tight rhythm section, pure energy. They toured with rising giants like Aerosmith, Boston, and Tom Petty. Night after night, they proved they could compete. Live, they were strong. But live success doesn't always translate into long-term fame. They released albums like Derringer, Sweet Evil, and If I Weren't So Romantic, I'd Shoot You. The sound was heavier, more aggressive. On paper, it made sense, but something bigger was happening in music, and it had nothing to do with skill. Punk exploded. Short songs, raw sound, no technical polish. It rejected everything Rick had spent years mastering. Then disco took over the charts. Drum machines, dance beats, a completely different audience. And then came something that changed everything: MTV. Suddenly, music wasn't just about how you sounded, it was about how you looked. Image mattered as much as talent, maybe more. And this is where it started to slip. Rick was a craftsman, a guitarist, a builder of sound. He wasn't built for flashy visuals or trend-driven image. His band could play better than most, but that wasn't enough anymore. Studios wanted hits that fit the moment. Labels wanted artists who could sell visually. Rick tried to adapt. There were experiments, slight shifts in sound, but they didn't land. Some critics saw it as chasing trends, others just didn't notice at all. By 1978, the band fell apart. And just like that, the idea of Rick Derringer as a major solo star was over. But here's the part most people misunderstand. He didn't fail. The industry moved, and he didn't change fast enough with it. That's a big difference. Because while his name started fading from the spotlight, his work didn't stop. In fact, this is where his influence quietly got even bigger. But it happened behind the scenes. Rick shifted back into the role he had always been best at: session player, producer, the guy who makes other artists sound better. And if you look closely, you'll find him everywhere in the 1980s. Different genres, different artists, same precision, same attention to detail. He worked on major records across rock and pop, adding guitar parts that most listeners never realized were his. But that's the thing about session work. When it's done right, you don't notice it, you just feel it. And Rick was one of the best at it. But wait, this next part changes how the industry saw him completely, because one unexpected collaboration would boost his success and quietly damage his reputation at the same time. By the 1980s, Rick Derringer was no longer chasing the spotlight. He was building things behind it, quietly, consistently, and across completely different parts of the industry. He worked with major artists, added guitar to huge records, helped shape songs that millions of people heard without ever seeing his name. That should have been a perfect role for him, and at first, it was. But then came a collaboration no one expected: Weird Al Yankovic. At the time, parody music wasn't taken seriously. It was seen as novelty, comedy, not real artistry. Rick didn't see it that way. He saw precision. Because parody only works if the music sounds almost identical to the original. And that's where Rick came in. He produced the early Weird Al albums, the first 6, including the massive hits Eat It and Fat, songs that mirrored artists like Michael Jackson so closely that they felt real and ridiculous at the same time. The records sold, they won awards, they reached huge audiences. On paper, it was a success. But here's where it gets complicated. The industry started to look at Rick differently, not as a serious rock producer, but as the comedy guy, and that label stuck. Rock artists didn't want to risk their image. Labels didn't want confusion in branding. So even though Rick was doing high-level work, he started getting overlooked for serious projects. It's a strange problem, success that quietly limits your future. But what if I told you his most recognizable work was still ahead of him, and it didn't come from rock music at all? In 1985, Rick worked on a project for the World Wrestling Federation. At the time, wrestling was becoming bigger than ever. Characters, storylines, larger-than-life personalities. They needed music that matched that energy. So Rick and his partner wrote a song designed to feel powerful, simple, direct, unforgettable. That song was real American.
You hurt my friends, then you hurt my pride. I gotta be.
At first, it wasn't even meant for Hulk Hogan, but when Hogan adopted it as his entrance theme, everything changed. The song became part of the character, and the character became one of the most famous figures in entertainment. Every time Hogan walked out, that music played, over and over, for years. Eventually, Real American became bigger than wrestling. It showed up in pop culture, political events, campaigns, different audiences, same song, and yet most people had no idea who wrote it. Rick had created one of the most recognizable anthems in American pop culture, and still remained in the background. That pattern kept repeating, big moments, hidden credit. By now the story was clear. Rick Derringer wasn't disappearing because he lacked talent. He was disappearing because he didn't fit a single role. Too versatile to be boxed in, too consistent to be flashy, too skilled to be ignored, but not marketable enough to be pushed as a star. And that kind of career doesn't fade all at once. It fades slowly. By the late 1980s, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Rick Derringer was still working, still recording, still touring, but the spotlight had fully moved on. New artists, new sounds, new priorities, and Rick didn't chase them anymore. After years of industry frustration and personal struggles, including a divorce, something shifted, not musically, personally. He turned back toward faith. His music changed with it. He still played his classic songs, but sometimes adjusted lyrics to reflect his beliefs. The focus wasn't fame anymore, it was meaning, and in a strange way, that gave him something the industry never did: peace. But even without chasing hits, he never stopped playing. In the 2000s and beyond, Rick stayed active. He toured with Ringo Starr's all-star band, played alongside legends like Peter Frampton, not as the main attraction, but as someone those artists respected. Because musicians knew. They knew what he could do. They knew how much of his work they had heard without realizing it. And that brings us to one of the strangest parts of his story: the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Rick Derringer had a #1 hit with Hang On Sloopy. He helped create Frankenstein, another #1. He recorded Rock and Roll, Hoochie Koo, one of the most recognizable rock songs of the 70s. He produced hits, played on major records, wrote Real American. A song that became part of American culture. And yet, he was never inducted. Not as a solo artist, not as a primary member of a band. Nothing. Fans even joked about creating a foyer of fame just to recognize artists like him. People who shaped music, but didn't fit clean categories. And here's where it gets wild. That absence might actually explain everything. Rick Derringer's career doesn't follow a simple rise and fall. It's something else. A career built across multiple lanes. Performer, producer, session player, songwriter. Each one successful, but none of them dominant enough to define him. And in an industry that rewards clear identities, that made him easy to overlook. On May 26, 2025, Rick Derringer passed away at the age of 77. The tributes came quickly, from musicians, from fans, from people who understood the details. Not just the hits, but the work behind them. Because Rick wasn't a headline, he was the structure holding the headline up. He was the reason songs sounded tighter, cleaner, better. The reason chaotic ideas became hits. The reason other artists looked bigger than they actually were. And maybe that's the real story. He didn't lose his place. He just stopped playing the game everyone else was chasing. From a garage in Ohio, to #1 over the Beatles, to shaping decades of music behind the scenes, Rick Derringer never stopped building. He just built for everyone else.